The boots cost $68. You bought them the week you turned 22. Steel toe, waterproof, nothing special. Years later, you could buy the company that makes them. Same brand, same aisle, same kind of boots, 22 years apart. Nobody would know, looking at your feet, what's sitting in your accounts. That's kind of the point. That was never the plan, though. Plans like that don't start as plans. They start as math. You grew up in a house where the lights got turned off twice. Not for drama, just for money. Your mom paid it back both times within the week. Nobody talked about it. You just remembered the sound the refrigerator made when it came back on. A small hum. Relief with a motor in it. So when you turned 18, you didn't go to college. Not because you couldn't, because the numbers didn't work for you that year in that house. 4 years? No income, a loan that would follow you into your 30s, and a mother who'd already paid off 2 overdue bills that same winter. You did the math on a napkin at a diner and folded it into your wallet. You still have that napkin somewhere. You knew other kids from your street who did the math differently, and it worked out fine for them too. This was just your number, not a rule about anybody else's. You became an apprentice electrician instead, under a guy named Rise, who'd been doing this since before you were born. Reyes didn't teach you with words. He taught you by making you watch. Watch the wire. Watch the panel. Watch what happens when someone gets lazy with a breaker box. Your first paycheck was $940 every 2 weeks. You did the math on that too. Rent was $310. Split with 2 roommates in a house that smelled like somebody else's cooking, always. Groceries were tight. The truck you drove to job sites belonged to the company, not you, which meant your own car was a Corolla with a check engine light that came on for reasons nobody could ever find. You didn't fix it. You learned to ignore it, the way you learned to ignore a sound in an old house. The boots weren't a statement. You needed steel-toe boots for the job site, and the $68 pair passed inspection the same as the $200 pair. Nobody on a job site cares what your boots cost. They care if your boots keep a dropped conduit pipe from breaking your foot. So you bought the cheap ones. Not from wisdom. From arithmetic. This is the part people skip when they tell stories about money. They want the moment where you chose discipline, chose the harder road on purpose, stood in a store, and picked the modest option out of some quiet inner strength. That's not what 22 looks like. 22 looks like a Corolla with a check engine light and a checking account that goes to $11 sometimes before payday. There's no virtue in it yet. There's just the only option in the room. Ray has noticed things about you that you didn't notice about yourself. You showed up 10 minutes early. You didn't ask when the shift ended. You brought your own lunch instead of buying from the truck that circled job sites at noon. Selling sandwiches for $9 to guys who didn't want to think about food. He never said any of this mattered. He just started giving you the harder panels, the ones where a mistake actually cost something. You opened a savings account that year. Nobody told you to. You just watched your mom's refrigerator go quiet twice, and something in you decided that would never happen again if you could help it. You put in $40 a week. Some weeks, it's $20. 1 week, after the Corolla finally needs a real repair, you put in nothing and don't look at the account for a month. This isn't a story about a kid who had it all figured out. You were tired most days. You ate the same 6 meals on rotation because thinking about food took energy you didn't have left. You went to your cousin's wedding in the one decent shirt you owned and hoped nobody looked too closely at the collar. But every 2 weeks, before anything else touched that paycheck, $40 moved into an account you tried not to think about. That's the whole beginning. No music behind it. No moment where the number on the screen changes your face. Just a $940 paycheck, a pair of boots that cost what they cost, and a decision so small it didn't feel like a decision at all. You don't know yet what this becomes. Neither does anyone else. Five years pass the way years pass when you're working, not watching. You get your journeyman license, then your master electrician license. Then Rise retires and hands you two of his regular clients like there's something he's passing down, not giving away. Your paycheck now reads $3,100. Every 2 weeks, more than triple where you started. The truck is yours now, not the company's. A used Ford, paid in cash, because a payment never made sense to you once you did the math on the interest. Your buddy Trent, who apprenticed the same year you did, buys a new one instead. Financed. 75 months. He shows it to you in the parking lot with the pride of somebody who just won something. You nod. You mean it mostly. It's a nice truck. You still drive the Corolla to the grocery store. The truck is for work. This is the year something shifts. That has nothing to do with money and everything to do with money. You show up to a bid, a rewiring job on an old house. Knob and tube pulled out, old panel replaced. You give the homeowner your number, fair number. You've run this math 100 times. She looks at you for a second too long. Then she says, "Is that your final price?" "My nephew's a contractor. He said this kind of job runs higher." You explain the scope, you explain the labor. You don't flinch, because the number is right and you know it's right. She talks you down $40 anyway. Not because the number was wrong. Because something about you, maybe the truck, maybe the boots, maybe just the way you talk, flat and quick and without performance, told her she could. You take the job. $40 isn't worth losing an afternoon over. But you think about it on the drive home. You think about it for longer than $40 deserves. Here's what you're starting to learn. The thing nobody put in any apprenticeship manual. Price and perception are two different conversations, and people only trust the one they can see. A guy in a branded polo with a company logo and a clean white van gets quoted and accepted on the first number, most of the time. You, in a faded shirt and boots that have been resoled once, get negotiated with. Your work isn't worse. You just don't look expensive. And people assume that means you're not supposed to charge like you are. You start noticing it everywhere once you see it the first time. The bank starts noticing you differently, though that part moves the other direction. A letter comes in the mail. Pre-approved credit card, real limit this time, not the secured kind you couldn't get at 22. Your credit score crossed 700 sometime in the last year, and you didn't even know it happened. The same bank that wouldn't touch you 5 years ago is mailing you offers now, printed like they're doing you a favor. You don't take the card. Not yet. You're still paying for everything with a debit card tied to money you actually have. And that habit feels less like restriction now, and more like something you'd have to talk yourself out of. A supplier you buy wire and fixtures from starts calling you by name when you walk in. Not sir, not buddy, your actual name. Cole, he remembers it after the third visit, and something about that lands harder than it should. So you stop pricing off habit and start pricing off math. Real math this time. Not just labor and materials, but overhead, drive time, the cost of a callback if something's wired wrong, the margin that actually lets you save instead of just survive. You write it down once, on the back of an invoice, and you don't deviate from it after that. The number stops being a guess you're embarrassed to say out loud. It becomes something you can explain, line by line, if anyone asks why. A few people still push back. You hold the number now, because you know exactly what's in it. This is the first crack in something you didn't know you believed. You thought doing good work quietly would be enough. That the truck, the boots, the plain shirt, none of that mattered if the panel was wired right and the breaker didn't trip. And mostly, it still doesn't matter. Most people just want the lights to work. But some people are buying more than electricity. They're buying the feeling of hiring someone who looks like they cost something. And you don't look like that. You never have. You bank the difference anyway. Every job, minus materials, minus gas, into the same account you started at 22, now sitting somewhere past $30,000. You haven't told anyone the number. Trent thinks you're doing fine. Fine is not the word you'd use if you used words like that with people. The first pair of boots wore through 2 years ago. The second one's soles are splitting now, right along the seam. You buy the third pair this year. $68, same brand, same aisle, price hasn't moved yet. You don't know yet that the real cost of not looking successful is still 4 years away. You start the company the year you turn 31. Not with a loan. With cash, $60,000 pulled from the account that started at $40 a week, plus whatever the truck and a used van could carry in tools and stock. You name it after nothing clever. Just your last name and the word electric. Reyes would have liked that. He's been gone 2 years by now. Heart, not the job, though you sometimes wonder if it was both. The paperwork takes longer than the work. LLC filing, insurance, a business account at the same bank that's known you for 9 years now. The banker who sets it up is a woman named Odalis, and she doesn't blink at your numbers. She's seen your account grow slow and boring for almost a decade. Boring, to a bank, reads as trustworthy. She approves your business line of credit in a single meeting. You hire your first employee that spring. A kid named Deshaun, 20 years old, the same kind of hungry you were at his age. You teach him the way Reyes taught you, mostly by making him watch. The work comes steady, not fast, steady. Residential rewiring, small commercial jobs, the occasional new construction contract that takes months instead of days. You're not rich, you're solvent, which is a word that means something different and, most days, better. Then a general contractor named Renata Cho calls you about a job that would change the math on everything. A 12-unit apartment complex. Full electrical build from the ground up. The kind of contract that takes 8 months and pays enough to double your company's yearly revenue in one signature. You meet her at the site. You walk her through your numbers, your timeline, your subcontractor plan. You've done work like this before, smaller versions of it, and you know exactly what you're talking about. She nods along. She asks good questions. You think it's going well. 2 weeks later, she calls to say she went with someone else. You ask why, because you always ask why, not to argue, just to learn. She's honest with you, more honest than she needs to be. Your numbers were actually better, she says. But the other company showed up with 6 trucks, a project manager and a hard hat with their logo on it. A whole presentation. My investors wanted to see, I don't know how to put this, they wanted to see scale. You showed up in 1 truck and told me the truth. That doesn't always win the room. You don't say anything for a second. I'm sorry, she says. I liked working with you more. That's not always the same thing as choosing you. You hang up and sit in the truck for a while before you drive anywhere. Here's the thing nobody tells you about staying small and staying honest. It doesn't automatically get rewarded. You've spent 9 years assuming that if the work was good and the numbers were clean, the rest would follow. Mostly it does. This time it didn't. The other company was carrying debt on 6 trucks and a logo and a project manager whose whole job was looking like scale. You were carrying nothing. And carrying nothing that day cost you a client worth more than your entire first year in business. You think about telling Deshaun. You don't. There's nothing useful to tell him yet. That's the honest reason, not any kind of secrecy. What it means, you decide somewhere around week 3 of thinking about it, is this. Looking successful and being solvent are 2 different currencies. Most of your life, you assumed they traded at the same rate. They don't. Sometimes the world only accepts one of them, and it's not always the one that's actually worth more. You don't change anything, in the end. You don't lease a fleet of trucks. You don't buy a logo for your 1 van. Deshaun asks you once, a few months later, if you ever think about looking bigger to get bigger jobs, and you tell him the truth. Yes, sometimes. And then you tell him you're not going to do it. Because the day you start spending money to look solvent is the day you have to stay looking solvent forever, whether the jobs are there or not. He doesn't fully get it. That's fine. You didn't either, at his age. The company grows anyway, just slower than it could have. 2 more employees over the next 2 years. A second van, bought used, paid in full. Renata Cho calls you again 18 months later, a smaller job this time, and you take it, and you don't bring it up, and neither does she. You buy the 4th pair of boots that year. $74 now, up from $68 when you bought the first pair 9 years ago. Inflation touches everything, even the thing you never planned to spend more on. You're 31. You've just learned that being right and being chosen aren't the same thing, and that the difference between them has a price, and you paid it once, and you'd probably pay it again. By 35, the company has 11 employees and a warehouse instead of a rented garage. Your accountant, a quiet man named Pharaoh who charges by the hour and never wastes one of them, tells you your net worth crossed $1,200,000 sometime last spring. You didn't notice when it happened. There was no day for it. It just accumulated, the way most real things do, without an announcement. You could buy almost anything now. You still live in the same 3-bedroom you bought at 29. The kitchen still has the same counters from when you moved in. You've meant to redo them for 6 years. You haven't. Because every time you get a quote, some part of you runs the same math you ran at 22, and the counters keep losing. This is the year you notice the distance. Not from money, from people. Trent, the same Trent from the finance truck at 27, calls less than he used to. He tells you about a boat he's thinking of buying. You ask a few questions, the kind you'd ask about anyone's decision, payment, insurance, how often he'll actually use it, and you can hear something change in his voice. Like you asked the wrong kind of question, like you weren't supposed to think about it, just be happy for him. You are happy for him. You just also think about the payment. A cousin asks you for $11,000 that year, a real ask, not a hint. You have it. You give it to him. No interest, no schedule. That part isn't hard. What's hard is the quiet way he starts treating you afterward. A little more careful, a little more formal, like you moved into a different room than the one he's in and he's not sure how to visit you there anymore. You didn't move. Not on purpose. But something did. This is the part nobody explains about the middle. It's not the poverty everyone recognizes. It's not the wealth everyone resents at parties. It's the stretch where your old life doesn't fit the same way. And the new one hasn't opened up yet either. You buy the 5th pair of boots that spring. $81 now, same brand, same aisle, same reason you gave yourself 13 years ago. Except it isn't the same reason anymore. At 22, you bought them because there was no other option in the room. At 35, there are 100 other options, and you choose these on purpose, every time. Because somewhere in the last decade the habit stopped being a decision and became a fact about who you are. The boots used to be math, now they're identity. Pharaoh asks you that fall, carefully, the way people ask when they know the question is personal. Whether you've thought about living a little more like your numbers. Nicer car, a remodel, something. You tell him no. It isn't stubbornness. You've just watched what happens the moment spending catches up to what people can technically afford. The treadmill that never arrives anywhere, just runs faster. He nods. He doesn't push. You drive home that night. You walk into the same kitchen with the same counters. You take off the same boots by the door. Nothing about the evening is dramatic. That's the strange part. You're not unhappy. You're just standing in a kitchen that fits a version of you. The people who knew you longest can't quite see anymore, and one you haven't fully grown into either. You don't know it, standing there. In 3 years, something is going to walk into your life and ask every one of these small decisions to prove itself at once. Not the money. What the money was for. The call comes on a Wednesday. You remember it was a Wednesday because you were standing in a parking lot eating a sandwich when your phone buzzed, and you never finished the sandwich. A general contractor you've worked with for 4 years. A company that owes you $218,000 for a finished job, invoiced, signed off, nothing in dispute, has filed for bankruptcy. Not a slowdown, not a late payment, a filing. The kind of filing where a lawyer explains, in careful language, that you are now something called an unsecured creditor, which is a polite way of saying you're at the back of a very long line. $218,000. Money you already spent. On materials, on payroll, on the 13 people who work for you now, who were counting on that job clearing before their next paycheck cleared too. You don't panic in the parking lot. That's not what this feels like. What it feels like is a very specific, very quiet kind of math starting up in your head. The same kind that started at 22 over a napkin at a diner. Except the numbers are bigger now, and so are the people standing behind them. You call Pharaoh that afternoon. He pulls the numbers while you're still on the phone. Cash reserves, $194,000, sitting in a business savings account you built slowly, on purpose, over 6 years, adding to it the way you used to add $40 a week to a different account a long time ago. It's not enough to cover the full loss. It's enough to cover 3 payrolls without missing one. You're going to be tight, Pharaoh says. You're not going to be in trouble. You don't fully believe him until the first payroll actually clears, on time, without you having to think twice about it. Here's what the next 11 weeks actually look like. Not dramatic, just tight. You stop taking a draw from the company for 2 months. You delay a van repair that isn't urgent. You have one hard conversation with a supplier about extending payment terms by 30 extra days, and he says yes, mostly because you've paid him on time for 9 straight years, and he trusts the pattern more than he trusts the promise. You don't lay anyone off. Not one person. Deshaun, who's been with you 8 years now and runs his own crew, doesn't even know how close it got until months later, when you finally tell him over lunch, because by then, it's a story instead of a wound. Odalis at the bank. The same Odalis who opened your business account 9 years ago calls you herself when she sees the deposit pattern shift. She isn't calling to warn you. She's calling to offer you a short-term credit line, unprompted, before you'd even thought about asking. Your file's been boring for almost a decade, she tells you, and you can hear that she means it as the highest compliment she has. Boring is what gets you the call before you have to make it. You don't end up needing the credit line. You keep it open anyway, unused, the way you'd keep a fire extinguisher you hope to never touch. 3 weeks after the bankruptcy filing, you hear that another electrical contractor across town, bigger than you, 6 trucks, the kind of company that showed up with a project manager and a logo and won the Renata Cho job 7 years ago, got hit by the same client's bankruptcy for a larger amount. Their bank calls their loan. The debt wasn't reckless, exactly, just leveraged. Financed trucks, financed equipment, a credit line stretched thin from carrying the appearance of scale for years. They can't absorb the same hit you just absorbed. They lay off 9 people in a single week. You hear about it from a supplier who mentions it the way people mention weather, like it's just something that happened, not something anyone chose. You don't feel good about this. You want to be clear about that, even just to yourself. Standing in your own kitchen that night, there's no satisfaction in watching someone else's version of this story go worse than yours. You just notice, quietly, the way you notice most things, that luck still mattered here. The same bankruptcy could have landed on you a year earlier, before the reserve was built. It could have come with a second bad month stacked on top, the kind no cash buffer survives. You know that. You're not going to pretend you outsmarted chance. But the cash buffer gave luck less room to decide the outcome. 13 years of boots that cost $68. Every dollar that didn't go toward looking bigger than you were. A credit line you never touched, sitting there because your file was boring, and boring, for the first time in your life, felt like the most valuable thing you owned. You eventually recover about 60 cents on the dollar from the bankruptcy, months later, through the unsecured creditor's settlement. Not the full $218,000, enough. You buy the 6th pair that year. Same time you always do. Sometime in early spring when the last pair's sole finally splits. $89 now. You don't think about the price when you pay it. You think for just a second, standing in the same aisle you've stood in for 16 years, about the reason you first bought them, not wisdom. Arithmetic. It turns out arithmetic was the wisdom the whole time. You just didn't know that yet. At 22, doing math on a napkin at a diner that's since closed down, you're 38 years old. You just found out, in the only way anyone ever really finds out, whether the quiet years actually meant something. They did. Six years pass the way years pass once nothing is trying to knock you down. Quiet years, mostly. Good ones. The company has 22 employees now, 3 vans, 1 panel truck, a warehouse you own instead of rent. Deshaun runs half the operation himself, and you've started letting him make calls you used to make alone. Your net worth, the last time you actually looked, sat somewhere past $3 million. You don't check it often. The checking stopped producing any feeling worth chasing a long time ago. You did finally redo the kitchen counters 4 years ago, not because you could suddenly afford it, you could afford it for over a decade, but because your daughter was born and you wanted a kitchen where a kid could sit at the counter and do homework without the laminate peeling under her elbow. That's the only kind of upgrade that ever made sense to you. Not status, function that mattered to someone you loved. A guy named Julian, who apprenticed under you 2 years ago and just started his own small outfit, stops by the shop one afternoon and asks how you built what you built. He's maybe 24. He's got the same tired look you remember having. You almost tell him about margins, about pricing, about the mistake of financing equipment before you can service the debt without flinching. Instead, you tell him about the boots. He laughs a little, like he's waiting for the real answer. You let him wait. Then you tell him it was never about the boots. It was about the fact that at 22, you didn't have a choice, and by the time you did have a choice, the habit was already older than the choice was. He asks if you ever wanted more. The nicer truck, the bigger house, the stuff his friends post about. You tell him the truth. Yes, sometimes. There were years, 27, 31, where wanting the appearance of success cost you something real. A negotiated down price. A client who picked 6 trucks over one honest truck and an honest number. You're not going to pretend the quiet path never cost you anything. What it also did, you tell him, is mean that the year everything actually went wrong didn't take you down with it. It took down a company that looked bigger than yours, looked richer. Looked, to anyone glancing from outside, like the safer bet. It wasn't. Julian doesn't say much after that. He asks on his way out where you get your boots. You tell him. Same brand, same store. He writes it on his phone like it's a stock tip. It isn't. But you don't correct him. Some things you have to learn are never really about the thing. That night, you sit on the back porch with your daughter, who's 4 now, while she names every bug she can find in the yard with total, unbothered confidence. The $40 a week at 22, the $68 boots, the truck bought in cash. None of it required willpower anymore, hadn't for a long time. It just required you to keep being the person you'd already decided to become, until the deciding disappeared into the being. The boots by the back door are on their 7th pair now. $94, last time you checked. Same brand, same aisle, 22 years of the same small decision, made so many times it isn't a decision anymore. It's just who you are. Somewhere tonight, in a hardware store off a highway exit that looks like every other highway exit, someone is standing in the boot aisle. 19, maybe 20. First real job, first real paycheck, still warm in his account, still feeling like more money than it actually is. He's holding 2 boxes. One says $68. The other says $140, with a name brand stitched on the side. He doesn't know yet what the boots were never really about. He puts the expensive pair back on the shelf. Not because he's wise, because the number in his account is still small enough that the math still does the deciding for him. That's fine. That's where it always starts. The wisdom comes later. If it comes at all.